The Boeing 737 had been cruising at 37,000 feet for 40 minutes when the turbulence hit. Not the kind that makes seasoned travelers grip armrests, but something else entirely. A shudder that felt mechanical, purposeful, like the airframe itself had flinched. In seat 22C, Captain Myrla Kovach didn't even open her eyes. Her fingers remained interlaced across her stomach wedding band, catching the overhead light, breath steady as a metronome. The businessman beside her had been typing frantically on his laptop since takeoff, pausing only now to glance at the woman who hadn't moved in nearly an hour. He assumed she was sleeping. He couldn't have been more wrong. The cabin speaker crackled with that distinct pre-announcement static, and the lead flight attendant's voice came through with practiced calm, the kind that masks legitimate concern. Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has illuminated the fasten seatbelt sign due to some unexpected turbulence. Please return to your seats immediately. Another jolt. Harder this time. A child, too, rose back, started crying. The businessman's fingers hovered over his keyboard, uncertainty creeping into his eyes as he looked toward the cockpit door. Still, the woman in 22C didn't move. What he couldn't see was the subtle tension in her jaw, the way her left thumb traced the edge of her right palm in a pattern so ingrained it had become involuntary. 4 taps, pause, 3 taps. A rhythm she'd learned in a cockpit half a world away, when her hands were wrapped around a stick instead of folded in her lap. What he couldn't know was that Myrla had already identified the turbulence as atmospheric, not mechanical, and had calculated their position relative to the jet stream based purely on the angle of sunlight through her closed eyelids and the subtle pressure change in her inner ear. Then the radio chatter began, faint but unmistakable, bleeding through the cockpit door that hadn't been properly sealed. Commercial frequencies don't normally carry much drama, but what came through next made Myrla's eyes snap open for the first time since Denver. Any military aircraft in vicinity of commercial route Alpha 79er, this is San Francisco Center. We have an emergency situation developing, repeat, emergency situation. We need immediate. Static consumed the rest. The businessman noticed her sudden alertness, the way her head tilted exactly 3 degrees toward the cockpit, processing. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, as if sharing a secret. Myrla didn't answer. She was already cataloging every sound, every vibration, her mind switching frequencies from civilian passenger to something else entirely. The flight attendant rushed past, her practiced smile replaced with something raw. Another voice on the radio, clearer now. "San Francisco Center, this is Air Force Rescue. We're tracking multiple targets. Civilian traffic needs immediate vector change. We have." Then came the word that made Myrla's heart rate spike for the first time in 3 years. Wolfpack. The businessman saw her face change, saw something ancient and fierce flicker across features that had seemed so serene moments before. He started to speak, but the aircraft banked hard left, and everything in the cabin that wasn't secured went sliding. Overhead compartments popped open. Oxygen masks deployed in rows 7 through 12. The crying child became screaming children. And through it all, Myrla remained perfectly still, her eyes locked on the cockpit door, waiting. Because she knew that call sign. She knew it the way a mother knows her child's cry in a crowded room. Wolfpack wasn't just a call sign, it was a ghost, a memory wrapped in titanium and regret, and it had no business being anywhere near civilian airspace. The lead flight attendant stumbled back toward the galley, her face drained of color, and Myrla caught her wrist as she passed. "What did they say?" Her voice was quiet, controlled, but carried an authority that made the attendant stop mid-panic. "What exactly did the cockpit say?" The woman's eyes were wide, unfocused. They said someone's coming, someone who can help. They used a name, something like Valen." She stopped, looked at Myrla more carefully, really seeing her for the first time. "Valerie, Valentine, no, that's not right. Valen, something." Myrla released her wrist and leaned back into 22C, her expression unreadable. The businessman had given up all pretense of working and was staring openly now, fear and curiosity warring on his face. Outside the window, the sky had changed. Not the light, not the clouds, but something intangible, as if the air itself had become charged with potential energy. She could feel it in her bones, that pre-flight electricity she thought she'd left behind in a hangar outside Ramstein Air Base, along with her wings and her clearance and her entire goddamn identity. Valentin, Meyerla said softly, almost to herself. They said Valentin. The businessman blinked. Is that, do you know what's happening? She turned to look at him directly for the first time, and he actually recoiled slightly from whatever he saw in her eyes. No, she said, but I know who's happening. She reached up and pressed the call button, one deliberate press, and when the shaken flight attendant returned, Meyerla spoke 4 words that would change everything. I need the cockpit. The turbulence hit again, violent enough to make the airframe groan. Through the window, impossibly close for this altitude, a shadow passed. Not a cloud, not another aircraft. Something moving with intention, with precision, with the kind of speed that made commercial aviation look like a child's toy. The businessman saw it too, his face going slack. What the hell was that? Meyerla was already unbuckling her seatbelt. The flight attendant tried to protest, regulations and protocols tumbling from her lips, but Meyerla moved with such fluid certainty that the words died unspoken. She'd made it 3 steps toward the cockpit when the radio crackled again, loud enough now that half the cabin could hear it. Commercial Flight Delta 274, be advised, you have a fighter escort. Do not deviate from current heading. Repeat, you are being escorted by, static. Then clearer, by request of Valentin. The cabin erupted in confused murmurs. Someone shouted a question. A woman started praying in Spanish, and Meyerla stopped moving, standing in the aisle like a statue, her hands at her sides, fingers curled into fists so tight her knuckles had gone white. Because they'd used her call sign, her actual call sign, the one that only existed in classified files and the memories of people who weren't supposed to talk about what they'd seen. The cockpit door opened before she reached it. The captain stood there, a man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and eyes that had seen their share of emergencies, but nothing quite like this. He looked at Meyerla, really looked, and whatever he saw made him step aside without a word. The first officer was on the radio, his voice tight with controlled panic. Air Force Rescue, we are a commercial flight with 230 souls on board. We cannot. He stopped when he saw Meyerla enter, something in her bearing making him trail off mid-sentence. She moved to the center position between the seats, her eyes scanning the instrument panel with practiced efficiency, then shifted her gaze to the windscreen. There, at their 11 o'clock position, maybe 2,000 feet out and holding formation like it had been painted into the sky itself, was an F-22 Raptor. Its angular stealth design caught the sun in ways that seemed almost alien, and even from here, Meyerla could make out the markings on its tail, the insignia she'd flown under for 8 years before everything went to hell in a classified folder. They're asking for you, the captain said quietly. By name. They won't tell us what's happening, but they said if Valentin was on board, we needed to get you up here. He paused. Are you Valentin? Meyerla's jaw worked silently for a moment. The businessman had followed her forward, breaking every rule in the book, and was now pressed against the cockpit doorway along with a handful of other passengers, all watching, all waiting. She could feel their eyes on her back, could feel the weight of expectation and fear and desperate hope. 3 years. She'd been out for 3 years, flying a desk and then not even that, just trying to be normal, trying to be someone who didn't dream in targeting solutions and evasive maneuvers. I was Valentin, she said finally, past tense. The first officer's hands trembled slightly on the yoke. Ma'am, I don't know what's happening, but they're saying there's a situation. Something about unidentified aircraft and civilian traffic in the path, and he stopped, swallowed hard. They said they need Valentin because you're the only one who's ever. He didn't finish. Meyerla closed her eyes, just for a second, and in that darkness she was back in the cockpit of her A-10 Thunderbolt II, that beautiful, ugly beast they called the Warthog, flying low over terrain that wanted to kill her, hunting targets that were hunting her right back. She remembered the weight of the stick, the smell of hydraulic fluid and fear sweat, the way her wingman's voice sounded over the radio at 3 in the morning when everything had gone sideways. She remembered being invincible and terrified in equal measure, young and stupid, and so damn good at what she did that they gave her a call sign that meant something. "They're hailing us again," the first officer said, his voice cracking slightly. "What do I tell them?" The F-22 adjusted position, coming closer, and Meyerla could see the pilot now, just a silhouette in the canopy, but she knew the body language, knew the way they held themselves. She trained half the pilots in that squadron before her separation, had drunk with them and argued tactics and saved some of their asses when simulations turned real. The Raptor waggled its wings, once, a gesture that was pure personality, pure recognition. Meyerla reached for the radio handset, her fingers closing around it with the muscle memory of 1,000 flights. The captain started to protest. Civilians didn't just grab aviation radios, but something in her expression made him swallow the objection. She pressed the transmit button and spoke, her voice carrying none of the uncertainty she felt, only the flat, professional tone of someone who'd done this so many times it was etched into her DNA. "Air Force Rescue, this is Valentin." She paused, tasting the old call sign like ash and honey mixed together. "I'm here. What do you need?" The response came immediately, a different voice now, younger, urgent. "Valentin, thank God. We have a situation developing 20 miles ahead of your position. Multiple unidentified aircraft, non-responsive to hails, vectoring toward civilian corridor. We need eyes and experience, and command says you're the only one who's seen this profile before." A pause loaded with meaning. "Karachi, ma'am. This looks like Karachi." The businessman in the doorway saw the woman in 22C go absolutely rigid, saw color drain from her face like someone had opened a valve. He didn't understand the reference, didn't know what Karachi meant, but he understood the look in her eyes, the look of someone being dragged back into a nightmare they'd thought was over. Around him, passengers pressed closer, sensing that whatever was happening, this woman was suddenly the center of it. This unremarkable person in jeans and a faded leather jacket who'd been sleeping in an economy seat 40 minutes ago. Meyerla's thumb found that rhythm again on the handset, 4 taps, pause, 3 taps, an old habit from old fears. "Karachi was classified," she said quietly. "That file is sealed." "The file is unsealed as of 12 minutes ago, ma'am. The situation is that urgent." The voice softened slightly. "We need you, not need in the abstract, need. Command has cleared you for immediate tactical consultation, and if necessary," the pilot paused. "If necessary, we have authorization to transfer operational control, temporarily." The captain's eyes went wide. "Transfer control of a commercial flight, that's not even." "Legal, yes, I know," Meyerla interrupted, still holding the radio. Her mind was racing through scenarios, through possibilities, through the kind of rapid threat assessment she hadn't done in 3 years, but that came flooding back like she'd never stopped. If it really looked like Karachi, then they were dealing with something that could turn very bad very fast. Karachi had been insurgents with stolen military drones, crude but effective, and it had taken everything she had, and cost her things she'd never get back, to bring those birds down before they reached populated areas. She looked at the civilian captain, at his clean uniform and his wedding ring and his commercial pilot's license that had never asked him to make the kind of choices she'd made. "If I help," she said carefully, "if I do what they're asking, things might get complicated, might get scary. These people," she gestured toward the packed cabin visible through the doorway, "they signed up for a flight to San Francisco, not whatever this is about to become." The captain stared at her for a long moment, and she could see him doing the math, weighing passenger safety against unknown variables, protocol against necessity. Finally, he said, "What do you need?" Meyerla pressed the transmit button again. "Valentin to Air Force Rescue. I need full tactical data, I need the actual pilot in that Raptor on my frequency, and I need you to be absolutely honest with me about what we're dealing with." She paused. "And I need to know why you unsealed Karachi. That operation had 9 people read into it. 9. So either someone talked or one of those 9 is involved in what's happening now," the voice finished grimly. "That's the working theory, ma'am. That's why we need you. You know how they think." The businessman felt his legs go weak. He leaned against the doorframe, his laptop forgotten somewhere in the chaos of 22C, and tried to process what he was hearing. Spy stuff, military secrets, betrayal and danger, and this woman who'd been sitting next to him like a normal person was apparently some kind of special operations pilot who dealt with terrorists and drones and situations dire enough to warrant sealed files. He wanted to be anywhere else. He also couldn't look away. The F-22 moved closer still, and now Meyerle could see it wasn't alone. 2 more Raptors materialized from cloud cover, forming a loose triangle formation around the 737, their presence both protective and ominous. The lead Raptor's pilot came up on frequency, and Meyerle's breath caught because she recognized the voice before he even finished his first word. "Valentin, it's Havoc. Long time." Her eyes closed briefly. Havoc, Captain Marcus Trent. She'd saved his life over Kandahar, and he'd bought her a drink that turned into 20 drinks, and then things had gotten complicated in the way they always did when adrenaline met proximity. They'd ended it professionally, stayed friends, and she hadn't spoken to him in 3 years because clean breaks were the only kind that worked. "Havoc," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Didn't expect it to be you." "Didn't expect to be calling you," he replied, and she could hear the grin in his voice, that cocky edge that had always been part of his charm. "But here we are. Command pulled me out of a training exercise because apparently I'm the only one you won't tell to go to hell." He paused. "Are they right about that?" Despite everything, the fear, the confusion, the civilians pressed into the cockpit doorway, the weight of 3 years trying to be someone else, Meyerle felt a small smile tug at her lips. "Depends on what you're about to ask me to do, Havoc." "Fair enough." His tone shifted, became serious. "Here's the situation. 23 miles ahead, we have 3 aircraft flying in formation, low and fast, heading directly towards San Francisco's approach corridor. They're not squawking transponders, not responding to any hails, and their flight profile matches the drones from Karachi. Same altitude changes, same evasive pattern. Difference is these aren't drones. We're reading heat signatures consistent with human pilots." Meyerle's tactical mind kicked into full gear. Stolen military aircraft. Unknown. They're painted black, no markings, but the profiles look like modified training jets. Fast enough to be a problem, maneuverable enough to cause chaos. Havoc's voice dropped. "And Valentin, here's the thing that has command spooked. One of them just broadcast a message on encrypted frequency that only Karachi team members would have access to. 5 words. Valentin knows what's coming." The cabin went silent. Even the crying children had stopped, as if the entire aircraft was holding its breath. Meyerle felt 230 pairs of eyes on her back, felt the weight of their lives suddenly become very real, very heavy. The first officer was gripping the yoke so hard his knuckles were white. The captain had gone pale, and the businessman in the doorway looked like he might throw up. "They're using my call sign to draw me out," Meyerle said quietly. "This isn't about the civilians. This is personal." "That's command's assessment," Havoc confirmed. "Question is, why? You've been out of the game for 3 years. Why pull you back in now? Why target a random commercial flight you just happened to be on?" He paused. "Unless it's not random, unless someone knew you'd be on this flight." Meyerle's mind raced backward through the past week. She'd booked the ticket last minute, a funeral in Denver for an old friend from flight school, nothing planned, nothing scheduled. She'd told exactly 3 people she was flying today, her sister, her therapist, and her blood ran cold. "Havoc," she said slowly, "what were the names of the 9 people read into Karachi?" "Classified even now. Why?" Because I need to know if Colonel Sarah Voss was one of them. Static filled the radio for 5 long seconds. When Havoc came back, his voice was tight. She was number 3, Deputy Mission Commander. Why? Myrla closed her eyes. Because Colonel Voss was my commanding officer in Karachi. She's also the person I filed a complaint against after the mission for ordering actions I believed were war crimes. She opened her eyes, stared at the 3 black dots growing larger on the horizon. She's the reason I'm not flying anymore. She's the reason my file got sealed. And she's the only person outside my immediate family who knew I'd be on this flight today. Because I called her 3 days ago to tell her I was finally ready to testify if the investigation ever reopened. The cockpit went absolutely silent. The captain looked between Myrla and the radio like he'd stumbled into a movie. The businessman felt his heart hammering against his ribs. And somewhere in the cabin behind them, a flight attendant was trying to explain to increasingly panicked passengers why their plane was being escorted by fighter jets, and why the woman from 22C was suddenly in the cockpit talking like a military commander. Havoc's voice came back, clipped and professional now. Valentin, I'm relaying this to command. Stand by. The frequency went quiet for a moment, then erupted with multiple voices talking over each other, codes and clearances and urgent tactical discussion. When Havoc came back, he sounded like he'd aged 10 years. Command confirms that Colonel Voss went off-grid 48 hours ago. Her last known location was a private airfield outside Phoenix. They're now treating this as a hostile action by a rogue military officer with access to classified equipment and personnel. Rogue, Myrla's voice was sharp. Marcus, she's not rogue, she's calculating. Everything she does is calculated. If she's coming after me, it's not about revenge. It's about silencing a witness before something bigger breaks. She paused, pieces falling into place. The investigation. Someone must have told her it's being reopened. Someone with enough clearance to know. The captain found his voice. I need to understand what's happening to my aircraft and my passengers. Are we in danger? Myrla turned to face him fully, and the man actually stepped back from the intensity in her eyes. Yes, she said simply. We're in danger. Those aircraft ahead are being flown by someone who has every reason to make sure this plane doesn't land. But I can help. I can get us through this. I just need you to trust me and let me do what I was trained to do. Which is what exactly? Survive impossible situations, Myrla said. It's kind of my thing. The businessman laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. This is insane. This is absolutely insane. I'm on a business trip. I sell insurance. This isn't supposed to. He stopped, looking at Myrla. You can really help. You can keep us safe. She met his eyes, and for the first time since this started, she let him see past the control, past the military bearing to the fear underneath, because she was afraid, terrified actually. But she'd learned long ago that fear and action weren't mutually exclusive. I'm going to try, she said honestly. But I need everyone to stay calm, follow instructions exactly, and trust that I know what I'm doing. Can you do that? He nodded slowly. Around him, other passengers nodded too, a ripple of reluctant faith spreading through the frightened crowd. The captain took a deep breath. What do you need from us? Myrla turned back to the windscreen, to the 3 black dots that were now clearly visible as aircraft, their formation tight and purposeful. I need you to fly exactly where I tell you to fly, when I tell you to fly there. No hesitation, no questioning, just immediate response. Those aircraft are faster than this 737, more maneuverable, and flown by people who have military training. Our only advantage is that I know how they think, because I helped train some of them. She picked up the radio, and I need to talk them down before someone makes a decision we can't take back. Havoc's voice crackled. Valentin, Command wants you to know that you're authorized to provide tactical guidance to the commercial pilot. They're also authorizing me to engage hostile aircraft if they make any aggressive moves toward your position. Rules of engagement are weapons-free if they lock targeting radar or attempt to close within 1,000 feet. Negative on immediate engagement, Meyerla said firmly. Havoc, these are pilots. Probably junior officers convinced they're doing the right thing. If Voss recruited them, she sold them a story. They don't know they're the bad guys yet. Give me a chance to break that story before we start shooting people down. Valentin. Give me a chance, Marcus, please. A long pause. Then, 5 minutes. You have 5 minutes to make contact and attempt de-escalation. After that, if they're still on intercept vector, I have orders to light them up. Command's not risking civilian lives on the hope that you can talk down traitors. They're not traitors, Meyerla said quietly. They're just young and stupid and following someone they trust. I was there once too. She switched frequencies, her fingers finding the old codes in muscle memory, and broadcast on the channel that only Karachi team members would monitor. Unknown aircraft on intercept vector with commercial Delta 274. This is Valentin. I know you've been told a story. I know someone you trust has told you I'm a threat, that I'm a traitor, that I need to be stopped. But that person is lying to you. Stand down and let me talk to you. Let me explain what really happened in Karachi. Let me tell you the truth. Static. The black aircraft continued their approach, now visible enough that Meyerla could make out their wing configurations. L-39 Albatros jets, checkmate advanced trainers, old but deadly in the right hands. Perfect for this kind of operation because they were fast enough to pose a threat but common enough on the civilian market that acquiring them wouldn't raise immediate red flags. She tried again. This is Captain Meyerla Kovac, call sign Valentin, serial number. She rattled off her service number from memory. I flew with the 354th Fighter Squadron for 8 years. I have 2 distinguished flying crosses and a Purple Heart. I am not a traitor. I am not a threat to American security. I am someone who saw something wrong and tried to do something right. And if you shoot down this aircraft, you will be murdering 230 innocent people to silence one witness. Is that what you signed up for? Is that the mission you want on your conscience? More static, but the lead aircraft wobbled slightly, just a tiny deviation in its flight path, and Meyerla felt a spark of hope. Someone was listening. Someone was doubting. Then a new voice came on frequency, older, female, carrying authority like a weapon. Captain Kovac, how unexpected to hear your voice. I was told you'd given up flying, given up everything, really. Yet here you are, interfering in operational security matters that are far beyond your current clearance level. Colonel Sarah Voss sounded exactly like Meyerla remembered, calm, controlled, absolutely certain of her own righteousness. The businessman saw Meyerla's hands clench into fists. The captain saw her jaw tighten. And Havoc, listening on the tactical frequency, began repositioning his Raptor into a more aggressive stance, ready to pounce. Colonel, Meyerla said carefully, whatever you think you're doing, whatever justification you've constructed, you need to stop. Now, before people die who don't need to die, before you cross a line you can't uncross. I crossed that line 3 years ago, Voss replied. In Karachi, when I gave an order and you refused to follow it. When you decided your conscience was more important than mission success. When you chose to be a liability instead of an asset. Her voice hardened. I should have dealt with you then. I should have made sure you never spoke to anyone about what you saw. Consider this a correction of past mistakes. The 3 L-39s accelerated, closing the distance. Alarms began screaming in the 737's cockpit as proximity warnings lit up. The first officer gasped. Passengers in the doorway screamed. And Meyerla stood perfectly still, her mind calculating angles and speeds and the exact moment when talking would stop working and survival would require something else entirely. Havoc, she said quietly, light them up. Target the lead aircraft only. Warning shots across their nose, make them flinch. With pleasure. The F-22 surged forward, its afterburners painting the sky, and 2 missiles streaked past the lead, so close that its pilot had to bank hard right to avoid the contrails. The formation broke, scattering like startled birds, and for a moment Meyerla thought it would work, thought the shock of nearly dying would snap them back to reality. Then the lead aircraft recovered, steadied, and came back on heading, and a targeting radar locked onto the 737 with a high-pitched whine that made everyone in the cockpit freeze. They weren't backing down. They were preparing to fire. "All passengers brace for evasive maneuvers," Myrla's voice cut through the panic, sharp and commanding. She grabbed the captain's shoulder. "When I say brake, you brake hard left and descend. Full control input. Don't be gentle. These people are used to military pilots who can handle G-forces. Commercial passengers will be thrown around, but alive is better than dead." "I can't just—" "Yes, you can. You will. Because in about 15 seconds they're going to fire, and if you don't move this aircraft like you're trying to shake off the devil himself, we're all going to die together." She met his eyes. "I've done this before. I've survived this before, trust me." The captain's hand moved to the yoke. His co-pilot followed suit, hands shaking but ready. Behind them, flight attendants were screaming instructions to brace, and passengers were crying and praying and clutching each other. And through it all, Myrla stood calm, counting down the seconds in her head, watching the black aircraft ahead, reading their intentions in the way they maneuvered, in the spacing of their formation, in every tiny tell that 3 years away hadn't erased from her pattern recognition. "Valentin," Voss's voice came again, "last chance. Transmit your exact location within the aircraft. Eject if you have to. Grab a parachute and jump. I'll have my people pick you up. The rest of these people can live, but you need to get off that plane or everyone dies. Your choice." Myrla closed her eyes, felt the weight of those words, felt the temptation to believe that giving herself up would save everyone. But she'd seen Voss operate before. She knew that promises made in desperation were worth less than nothing. The moment Myrla was off this plane, everyone aboard would die anyway, because dead witnesses couldn't contradict whatever story Voss planned to tell. "No deal," Myrla said. "You want me, you're going to have to murder 230 people to get me. And that's not something you can cover up, Sarah. That's not something any story will justify. That's just mass murder, plain and simple, and everyone listening to this frequency will know exactly what you are." "So be it," Voss said coldly. "Fire." "Brake left now," Myrla shouted, and the captain threw the yoke hard over, and the 737 banked with a violence that commercial aircraft weren't designed for, and passengers slammed into seats and overhead compartments rained luggage, and someone's laptop went flying like a missile through the cabin. The businessman screamed. A flight attendant hit the ceiling and came down hard. And through the windscreen, Myrla saw a missile pass through the space where they'd been 2 seconds earlier, its contrail a white scratch across blue sky. "Havoc weapons free," she called. "Engage, engage, engage." The 3 F-22s dove into the fight, and suddenly the peaceful sky at 37,000 feet became a combat zone, and Captain Myrla Kovac, who'd been trying so hard to be just another passenger in 22C, found herself right back where she'd always belonged, in the center of chaos, making split-second decisions, trying to save lives while others tried to take them. The only difference was that this time, she wasn't in control of the aircraft. This time, she was the weapon someone else was trying to wield, and the only way to survive was to become something she'd sworn she'd never be again. The hunt was on, and Valentin was both the hunter and the hunted, and the sky above California was about to learn why that call sign had meant something once upon a time, before it all went wrong in a classified folder that someone had just ripped wide open for the whole world to see. The story of Karachi was coming out, one way or another. The only question was who would be alive to tell it when the smoke cleared and the aircraft stopped falling and the truth finally had nowhere left to hide. But that moment was still many desperate minutes away, and right now, all that mattered was the next second, the next heartbeat, the next impossible choice that would determine whether 230 people made it home to their families or became a statistic in someone else's cover-up. Myrla stood in the cockpit of a commercial airliner that was now flying like a fighter jet, and she felt the old familiar rush of adrenaline and terror mixing in her bloodstream. And she remembered why she'd loved this life, and why she'd left it, and she wondered which version of herself would be standing when this was all over. If she was standing at all. The first exploded in a ball of fire as Havoc's missile found its mark, and Meyerla felt no joy in it, only a heavy sadness for whoever was flying that aircraft, whoever had believed Voss's lies enough to die for them. One down, two to go, and somewhere in one of those remaining black jets, a woman who'd once been her commanding officer was trying to decide whether revenge was worth becoming a mass murderer. Meyerla knew the answer. She just hoped Voss would figure it out before more people had to die to prove the point. But hope and survival were different currencies in aerial combat, and right now, survival was the only one that mattered. She gripped the back of the pilot's seat and prepared to give the next order, the next impossible instruction that would keep them alive for another handful of seconds. And in seat 22C, her book lay abandoned, open to a page about forgiveness and second chances, words that seemed like they belonged to a different universe than the one currently exploding around them at 600 miles per hour and counting. The businessman who'd sat next to her was pressed against the cockpit wall, tears streaming down his face, and he kept saying the same thing over and over. "I sell insurance. I sell insurance. This isn't real. This can't be real." But it was real. It was the most real thing any of them had ever experienced. And it was only just beginning. The second came screaming in from their 4 o'clock position, and Meyerla saw the pilot's intent before the aircraft even moved. "Dive," she shouted. "Full nose down, emergency descent, do it now." The captain complied without question this time, and the 737 dropped like a stone, altitude bleeding away, in a controlled fall that felt anything but controlled to the passengers being thrown against their seatbelts, feeling their stomachs climb into their throats, hearing the airframe groan under stress it wasn't designed to handle. Another missile streaked past, this one so close that its heat wash rattled the fuselage. Havoc and his wingmen were engaging the L-39s hard now. No more warning shots, just pure aggressive prosecution. But the enemy pilots were good, better than they should be. And they were using the 737 as both shield and target, making the Raptors hesitate, making every shot a risk of hitting the commercial flight. "They're trained," Meyerla muttered, watching the merge. "Someone gave them advanced tactical training. Sarah didn't just recruit random pilots. She recruited good ones and made them better." She keyed the radio. "Havoc, they're using me as cover. You need to get them to commit to an attack, draw them away from the 737. "Negative, Valentin. My orders are to protect your aircraft." "Then protect it by giving them a better target. Make them choose between killing me and staying alive. Their training will override Voss's orders. Nobody wants to die, not really." She paused. "Do it, Marcus, trust me." "Damn it, Meyerla." But he banked away, his wingmen following, and suddenly the F-22s were no longer between the L-39s and the 737. They were hunting from behind, aggressive.